Welcome to this very special edition of The Author's Voice with KAJ, a show where we explore the stories behind the stories. Here we dive into the worlds created by authors, discover their inspirations, and ensure that you walk away enriched and inspired. And today we have with us author Steve Anderson. He is an expert in strategic risk and business growth, and drawing on decades of experience in the insurance industry, he wrote the Bezos letters, 14 principles to grow your business, like Amazon, which later became a Wall Street Journal, USA Today International bestseller. And LinkedIn designated him as a top voice with over 300,000 followers. Welcome to the show, Steve.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here and look forward to our conversation.
You're welcome. Welcome to the show, Steve. And we'll be talking about your book, as we said, and we'll learn about. But before that, let's understand a bit about your journey towards becoming an author, Steve.
Well, it certainly was I would say, a roundabout journey. As you mentioned, I've been in the insurance industry for almost my entire career. The last number of years, probably 25. I've done technology consulting for insurance agents, which has given me kind of a view of how fast technology is changing, how difficult it is to implement, and all of those kinds of things. And through that experience, I started asking the question, is the biggest risk businesses face actually not taking enough risk? And mainly because, technology continues to develop really rapidly. We're certainly experiencing that today with generative AI agents, right? All those kinds of things. And it feels like it's hard to hold on. It's going so fast. So I started doing research and looking at companies that had once been very successful and were gone. I mean, literally out of business, and big companies. I looked at companies that have been successful and continue to be successful, and started looking at, okay, what are the differences? Why did some go away? And we know, some of the common names, I guess now for me is, Kodak and BlackBerry and Blockbuster and, lots of different companies we know that didn't keep up with the changes, basically. So through that, I came across Amazon as a success story, and they continue to be successful even through lots of ups and downs over the years. And that led me to the letters to shareholders that Jeff Bezos wrote. And I had read a few of those, kind of through the years. You hear about it when they get published. And but I took a little different tact in that I took all the letters that were published, and at the time I was doing this research, there were, I think, 22 letters. So first letter was 1997. The last letter we cover in the book is 2018. What I realized when I read those letters as a book, one right after the other, that there were threads through the letters. And Bezos did something different than most CEOs. He talked about not just what they did and their successes, but he talked about how they did it and their failures, what didn't work, and then how they pivoted. And so that's what really caught my attention. So I was intrigued by all of that. And my first, what I call iteration of what became the book, was a white paper. One page, what I called executive summary of each letter, kind of highlights of the letter, so a couple key quotes. Here's some takeaways that you might be able to apply in your business. Now, fortunately, my wife is in the book publishing business. So I was talking to her about that, and she stopped me and said, that's not a white paper, that's a book. And frankly, at that point I went, oh shit, I don't know how to write a book. And so started the research, started looking deeper into it, ended up coming up with the 14 principles that I write about in the book. And that's why this book is not tactics, it's principles. And that's why I think it can be applied to almost literally any business, and not just business, nonprofits, religious organizations, lots of different places that people have told me these principles have helped them. So that's the background. It took about 18 months from this is a book to actually getting it published. And Karen's name is on the book because she helped significantly in writing it. So if you read the book and you like how it reads, that's her part. If you like the principles, that's my part. And so it was a great collaboration. And I will tell you, one of the questions I get fairly often is, how did it go writing a book with your wife? And two things I say. One, we're still married. In fact, we'll celebrate our 50th wedding anniversary here this next August. But the real reason it worked is I completely trust her and her opinion. And so she knows books and she knows how to write a really good book. So that's the background.
That's the background. So, and that's the background, but what's inside the book? 14 principles you talk about, but is that all? How should a person who has not read the book as yet, how would you like to describe this book to them?
So I'll make a couple comments there. One is 14 principles is a lot. So what we did is we organized them into what I call 4 cycles, and that's how the book is structured. The cycles are test, build, accelerate, and scale. And I believe those actually are the cycles that businesses go through. Test is the startup phase. Build is, okay, we've had some success, so how do we move forward? How do we start growing? Accelerate is even, okay, now we're getting some real traction. How do we accelerate that? And then scale is, how do you maintain the culture, the ideas, the principles in your business when you're growing really fast or growing really big? And frankly, those businesses that are gone right now, scale was their big problem. They were big businesses, but they weren't able to, one, recognize the trend changes, and two, adapt to those changes. And so, they went out of business. So within each of those 4 cycles are 3 to 4 principles that relate to that particular cycle. So frankly, one way to read the book is not cover to cover, but what are the principles? What stage are you in now? And then focusing on some of those principles so that you can begin incorporating those mindsets, those changes, those principles into what you're building in your organization.
Absolutely. So, Steve, is this book for also small business owners? Jeff Bezos was a small business owner at one point in time. Does it work for small businesses in today's time? How would you like to tell?
So I get that question a lot, right? People say, okay, Amazon, are you kidding? They're huge. One of the largest companies in the world, 1.3 million employees, all that stuff. And you said it. Bezos started like every other entrepreneur, had an idea, saw the internet, and this is like mid 90s. And the internet, if you remember back in those days, I was there, people were like, this is a fad, or this is, not, what is this? This is not going to work. Had an idea and literally started in his garage in a house in Bellevue, Washington. And literally on his hands and knees, getting books that people had ordered, that they had gone to a warehouse to get, putting them in packages, putting them in his car, taking them to the post office and mailing them off. That's the definition of a small business. I think the question should be, yes, it applies. And how can a small business, and I'm going to hesitate here a little bit. What I was going to say is grow like Amazon. But you know what? Everybody doesn't want to grow to Amazon's size. And that's okay. you can grow in your own niche to your own skill level and use these principles to make it better for you, and maybe more importantly for your customers, for for the business, for your employees, for the customers. And I think that's one of the magical pieces. And I will go back, as we have talked about risk, and I'm in the insurance business, and right, and it's really counterintuitive because in my business, everything we do is to reduce and mitigate risk, right? Not to have risk. But that's not possible not even in the world. I mean, we always are taking risks. The question is, how are we managing that risk? And I think that's one of the things that really stood out to me with Jeff Bezos is his mindset around risk taking. And as a small business, you need to take risks, and you need to take smart risks. I can hear people thinking, I don't have the money to lose that Amazon has today. Well, you know what? He didn't either in the 90s when he started. And so, but being thoughtful, intentional, and strategic on the risks you take, and then how to implement them and incorporate them into your business and into your interaction with your customers. And so a bunch of principles are around that kind of idea.
Right. Any particular, idea, excerpt, or passage? Can you think of that? Okay, this is you want readers to definitely read or know about. If you want to read, you feel free.
I was going to say a couple come to mind. So my first principle in the test cycle is called encourage successful failure. Now, typically, you don't hear those two words together. How can you have a successful failure? A failure is a failure. But a successful failure is, what did you learn? And how did you bring that forward to something else? So let me give you a quick example. In the mid-2000s, Jeff Bezos got in his head that he wanted to have an Amazon phone. And he built one because he could, right? He ran the place. It was called the Fire Phone. Came out in 2014, and an utter flop, an utter failure. I doubt anybody even remembers that Amazon had a phone. And it was a phone that made shopping on Amazon easier. There were one or a couple of technical things that made it maybe a little bit different. But the iPhone had been out for 7 years. People had either Android or iPhone had already chosen. They didn't need another option. He was too late. Went ahead anyway, utter failure, to the tune of $128 million write-off at the end of 2014. Inventory, development costs, right, those kinds of things. And the team that created the phone, actually one of the first, so the first hardware was the Kindle. Phone was, I don't know if it was second, but it was early. But 3 months after the Fire Phone was announced and released, Bezos got a demonstration from that same team of a cylinder that could sit on a counter or a table that you could talk to, and it would answer you. We now know as the hardware is the Echo, the software is Alexa. All of what they learned about voice processing with the phone, they were able to pivot and incorporate into what now arguably is certainly a very successful product line for Amazon. And there are millions of those devices in homes across the world. So that's the idea of a successful failure. What can you learn? The second one that comes to mind, and especially with small business, is in the build cycle, and it's called obsess over customers. And Bezos wrote about this in his very first letter in 1997. There were several sections. One section in that letter talked about, we will obsess over customers. Now, businesses know they need to take care of customers, right? But we talk about it in terms of customer journey, customer focus, right? Customer service. I have never heard any other business use the word obsess. And it's a different type of word. It has a different connotation. In fact, it can have a negative connotation, right? Somebody can be too obsessive. From in Bezos thinking, you can never be too obsessive in helping your customer. So again, let me give you a couple examples of how that works out and may be different. I think most people who have heard of Amazon know at least either are subscribers to or know about Amazon Prime, right? It started in the early 2000s. One of the big friction points for customers at that time, you probably, if you were buying, you remember, you'd pick up, fill up your cart, you'd go to checkout, and all of a sudden, there'd be an additional charge for shipping. And now your mind, that's friction. Your mind goes, well, I don't know that I want to pay for that. I can just go to the store, right, and pick it up. So what Bezos said is, let's remove that friction point. Let's provide free shipping. And I'm going to bring Tess back in because they tried 2, 3, or 4 different iterations or types of free shipping. Buy $25 and you'll get free shipping, right? Or there were several things they tried along the way. Finally, Bezos said, no, we're going to provide free shipping. It'll be a subscription. So we'll make some revenue, right, to cover some of the shipping costs. And 2 days, they can get their product, not have to pay for shipping. They removed that friction point. And his financial team went crazy. We can't afford to do that. How are we going to do that? That could cost us billions of dollars. And frankly, it does. And what Bezos said, and this is a common phrase, if it's better for the customer, it will be ultimately better for Amazon and our shareholders. And so they can now look at Prime, right? It's not just free shipping. In fact, depending on where you are, I just ordered something last week and it came like at 4 a.m. the next morning on my porch. So it's barely 1 day. Sometimes it's hours, right? Some places it's a couple days is still standard. But Amazon continues to focus on how can we take friction out of our customers' experience. Now, what does Amazon get out of that? Well, the easier it is to shop, the more people shop. So the more volume Amazon has, that volume helps them negotiate better pricing from the manufacturer. So now prices get lowered. That lower price and easier shopping brings more customers in. That just keeps that cycle going. So any business, and here's why I think it's easier for small businesses. They don't have entrenched culture. They don't have entrenched bureaucracy to start thinking differently about how they can interact and improve their customers' experience with them. So I actually think, back to your earlier question, I think it's easier for small businesses because they can pivot faster than a large organization that has, right, all of this stuff built up around their idea, their product, their service, their platform.
Right, Steve. So one thing comes to my mind is that when Jeff Bezos started his business, that time there was no AI. But today's small businesses have got this artificial intelligence. How do you think, if Jeff Bezos were a small business owner in today's time, starting today, how would he look at artificial intelligence?
I'm trying to I've got a whole bunch of thoughts, so I'm trying to formulate how I want to answer that. He would embrace it. And I'm trying to think how much background to give with this. But in 2016, let me step one back. The last principle in the scale cycle is called believe it's always day one. This is a principle that Bezos wrote about in his letters. In fact, every single letter that he wrote always ended with some form of it's day one, it continues to be day one, it's still day one. And even in 2019, which I call the pandemic letter, even with all of the problems we've had, it's still day one. In 2016, Bezos was in front of several thousand employees on a quarterly all hands meeting, typical process. He had gone through updates in the company, and at the end, he usually opened it up for questions from employees. So they wrote them down on cards and he looked at them. The question he looked at was, Jeff, what does day two look like? And he kind of chuckled and said, I think I know the answer to this. And he said, day two is stasis, followed by irrelevance, followed by painful, excruciating decline, followed by death. And that's why it's always day one. Now, that story is the background to me answering your question, because he went on to write in the 2016 letter about that story, and he said, that's what happens to companies, right? They get stuck. But he said, I'm more interested in how to fend off day two. And he said there were at least four things, or at least right for him right then were four things. One is customer obsession, which we talked about. Two is a skeptical view of proxies. And in his mind, proxies equal bureaucracy, right? It's all those layers. It's when you hear a customer service person say, well, that's not company policy, I can't do that. When a proxy doesn't continue to serve the customer, then you need to question. And he said, you need processes and procedures. He's not saying that. Third is eager adoption of external trends. And that's the point I want to bring to answer your question. He actually identified in 2016 external trends. The trend he identified then was machine learning. Now think about 2016. Amazon was already building. So in today's world, if you're not experimenting, if you're not playing with, if you're not figuring out how AI and generative AI is going to impact your business and can help your business, then you're already on a path to day two. And just to finish that, the last one, the fourth one, is high velocity decision making. So we haven't talked about that one yet, but it is how Amazon makes decisions, and they do it in a way that's very counterintuitive to most businesses.
Absolutely. So, Steve, I want to understand what was the most challenging part of writing this book?
So it was my job to come up with the first manuscript, right? The first and stories and, all of that. Because my mindset was chronological, I read 97, 98, 99, 2000, that's how I wrote it. In 2012, he did this. In 2016, he did this. And with some trepidation, I sent it to my wife for her to take a look at. And I still remember coming home a couple of days later. She had looked through the manuscript and she said, I need to talk to you. Well, yeah, you're laughing because as a husband, that's never a good phrase to hear when you walk in the door, right, at night. And so we sat down and she said, thank you, for putting all this together. And nobody cares what year he said what. And I kind of went, okay. And she said, can you come up with principles? And literally at that point, I mean, I really did say, I don't know. I mean, I was pretty, I felt like I'd worked hard and, tried to get this, but her pushing me that way. So that was really hard to answer. That was really hard. And her pushing me that way, we actually, within a couple days, I had 8 principles. We ended up expanding it out to 14. And principles, and she's right. That's why I think she's brilliant. Principles are timeless. Tactics come and go. And that's why the book is built around principles that I think will be applicable for many years to come. So yeah, that was hard.
Absolutely. So in a nutshell, Steve, what do you want the readers, what key messages, key insights you want them to take away from this?
There's a way to think about your business that's not traditional. I mean, obsess over customers, the successful failure, and even the idea of, and part of that successful failure is you have to experiment to be able to invent on behalf of the customer. And I think right now in kind of the business press and mindset and what you read, there's almost 100% focus on innovation. I think you can innovate yourself out of business, because when you innovate and innovate and innovate, you're not looking at what's new and next. That's why I think invention is more important than innovation. So in Bezos' process or mindset, experimentation, which means you're going to fail. So if you're going to experiment and you know it's going to work, it's not an experiment. By its very nature, an experiment has failure built into it. And Bezos says Amazon is the best business company in the world for an employee to come and fail. Now, I always want to kind of put something around that, saying Amazon is intolerant of incompetence. So it's not just who cares, but it's intentional thinking, planning. How can we make this better? So experimentation leads to invention, which then allows innovation. So even the Kindle wasn't the first e-reader. There were a few other ones, but what the Kindle did, because of their customer obsession, is they removed the cable. The other earlier e-readers, you had to plug into a computer and transfer books. With the Kindle, their invention was wireless. And it was built in. You didn't have to connect to a Wi-Fi. It was built in using the cellular network. The goal of the Kindle from the very beginning was any book in the world in 60 seconds or less. You could begin reading. Now, they innovated and they continued to update and change, and new things coming with the Kindle. But the original idea, how can we invent? And again, that's customer obsession, right? So how can we take friction? The cable was friction. And then they continued to innovate. I think one of the most amazing technological advances of Amazon is called WhisperSync. You can pick up a Kindle, be reading a book. You can go to your phone and actually pick up exactly where you left off. Technologically, that's really difficult. That's called WhisperSync. Now they even do it with audiobooks. You can be reading a Kindle and then go to Audible and listen, and you can be listening from where you left off when you were reading. Those are the results of experimentation, customer obsession, and having a clear vision for what you want to accomplish on behalf of the customer.
Absolutely. There's so much to learn from you, Steve, and so much to learn from your book. and I'm sure a lot of people would want to connect with you and want to have your book. What is the best way for them to do so, Steve?
Well, and you showed the cover, but I'll just show it again. Here's the cover. If you're wondering, it is available on Amazon. So couple resources. One is I have a website for the book called thebezosletters.com, and there's some information and material there. And connecting with me, the best platform is LinkedIn. As you mentioned, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. So you can search Steve Anderson Insurance or Steve Anderson Bezos. You should find my profile. Connect with me. Let me know you listen to this, and I'll be glad to connect with you. And I publish a lot around Amazon and what they're doing and how they're continuing to build on behalf of the customer there. So that'd be a great way to connect.
Wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of The Author's Voice with KAJ. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.